In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. Our special guest today is Cynthia Moore, an award-winning playwright, performer, therapist, and now author, joining us to talk about her captivating new memoir, Dancing on Coals, a memoir of an overperformer. Endorsed by none other than Whoopi Goldberg, Cynthia's memoir takes us on an unforgettable ride through a life as colorful and complex as the theater she once graced. From her childhood in the Bahamas to finishing school in Switzerland, a vibrant theater career in the San Francisco Bay Area, and finally a decades-long journey as a mental health counselor, Dancing with the Coals is a story of transformation, resilience, and finding peace. Cynthia Moore, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
We all have to write a book at some point in our lives. Why did you decide to write this one?
I had to figure it out. Why did it happen? How did it happen? And what did it all mean?
Dancing on the Coals begins at the end with your present-day domestic bliss. What inspired you to structure the book that way?
Well, I think I wanted to get to a point where I had a teaching story, something to give young women, something to give young performers, something to show, especially people who have spent a lot of their years trying to belong or fit into systems that don't quite fit them or accept them wholeheartedly. As I did, I worked in many all-male theater groups and tried really hard to fit in. And, you know, the definition of fitting in is cutting off parts of yourself in order to get acceptance. And I did that. I cut off parts of myself to do that. So I wanted to finish the book with the clear ending of self-acceptance and having come to some peace with that whole journey that I went through in my life.
What attracted you to theater?
Well, when I was 6 years old, I lived in Nassau in the Bahamas, and I was cast in Yul Brynner's King and I. Do you remember Yul Brynner did The King and I on Broadway?
I sure do.
They had a touring production, and I was the 6-year-old, one of the 6-year-old children. And I loved it. It was heroin. I was completely addicted. With the staying up late at night and having my hair dyed black, and it was just wonderful. And I've been in the theater ever since. Well, I was until 20 years ago.
How does a 6-year-old process all of that?
It feels like love. And I didn't have a whole lot of love in my family of origin, so it was a great replacement, which was a bit of a problem, as you can tell. It led me in a bit of a wrong direction, you could say, but I wouldn't turn it around. I wouldn't change it for the world. It was a great journey, and I loved it.
Without giving us away too many spoilers, what can you tell us about that journey?
Well, I think it was really a journey of a woman trying to find her voice and trying to find it in a male world and trying to find a masculine version of a voice, which was sort of performative and extroverted and macho and very physical. And that was fun. It was worth trying, but it wasn't authentic. And so what I did was I did a bold pivot halfway through my life. And as Carl Jung, the psychologist, says, in your midlife, you turn from an outward focus, from the ego focus, to a more inward focus of the soul and the spirit. And I think that's what I did. I turned inward and I became a therapist, and I learned what authenticity was. I learned what vulnerability really was. And I wrote this book to try to make fun of my pain, my traumas, make them funny and laughable. You know, my favorite critique is when someone says, I laughed out loud.
So you laughed at your own pain?
I think that's do you know the writer Annie Lamott?
Oh, I sure do. Yeah.
Beautifully about vulnerability and pain and insecurity. And you laugh at the same time as your heart is breaking, right?
Well, how did you decide to title it The Memoir of an Overperformer?
Well, it started out as a memoir of a performer because I felt like performing was a metaphor for what I did, not just performing on stage, but I was performing myself in a way. And the publisher actually came back to me and said, that feels a little broad. And we batted back and forth a few titles, but the overperformer kind of brings in this hungry ghost concept. The title Dancing on Coals comes from an Anne Waldman poem, and she's a Buddhist poet. And her poem is called Sleeping with the Hungry Ghost. And the hungry ghost is a Buddhist concept of someone who's insatiable and craving and striving. And the poem goes, sexy ghost, a performer, a demon, a gadfly, never having enough, being enough, doing enough. So that's where the title comes from.
You sound like a very complex and well-read person. What was your attraction to knowledge?
To knowledge, interesting. Well, in the Bahamas, it's a British school system, and it's pretty rigorous, and it was very important to succeed academically for me. And so that was my drive in life, was to succeed academically. And so I think I developed a pretty strong prefrontal cortex, and I've capitalized on it ever since.
Cynthia Moore is our special guest. Her brand new book is Dancing with Coals, a memoir of an overperformer. How did your sense of self evolve over your lifetime?
That's a very interesting question. Yeah, I would say my sense of self started out with how other people saw me. And many of us have that. We look to others for affirmation or for a reflection of who we are. And gradually it began to drop inward into what we call in psychology a felt sense, that there's a felt sense of integration, of integrity, of authenticity. And you can trust that. There's something you can trust in that. I think they call it confidence. And that's what I really wanted to plumb and explore and express in my book, that shift from outward sense of self to an inner sense of self.
And you write so candidly about the difficult relationships and influence of your parents. How did writing about these experiences affect your healing process?
It was helpful to write about it. I think forgiveness came out of it. I realized that my parents couldn't have done any better. They were doing the best they could. And I tried to make that humorous too. I think my mother comes across as a pretty humorous character in many of the places in the book. And she would have liked that. She would have enjoyed that. She was an entertainer of sorts.
Well, and David seems like a pivotal turning point in your life. What can you tell us about that part of the story? So deeply personal and positive.
So positive. I met my husband, David, when I was 33, and he absolutely calmed my nervous system. I had, as I've described over the first 33 years of my life, I was sort of flailing and striving and efforting, and my nervous system was pretty, as we say in psychology, dysregulated. And then I met this man, and he was so calm and so peaceful in his inner being that I responded. And I said, this is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. And I come from a family with a lot of divorce and a lot of failed marriages. And that's sort of the norm in my family. But I met David and I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay married to this man and make love work. That was a real drive for me to make love work. And love is a verb. It's an action. It's a job that we do. And I think we've done a beautiful job. We have great kids. We have a fabulous grandson. And we're still happy 43 years later. I'm proud of that.
You can love somebody and have days where you don't like them at all. How did you navigate through the ups and downs of a 43-year marriage?
I made him process a lot. You can imagine being married to a therapist sometimes isn't that much fun. We got to process everything, right? That thing you said about the stove yesterday. I had some feelings about that.
Process is a term that those of us who had relationships with therapists understand completely. What about those who don't know what it means?
Oh, it means talking everything to death. It means taking something that may have been a small event, may have triggered a feeling in you that was just uncomfortable or that made you a little angry, and not letting it go until 20 of those build up, but saying, that thing yesterday about the stove, I'm just using that as an example. That triggered, I was a little angry because I felt X, Y, and Z from my past. So you try to take ownership of what you're bringing to that. It's not all you. I had a history with my parents that led me to respond to your comment in this way. And you can always move through things when you process them in that way, because you get understanding of what actually happened, what the dynamic is, what the pattern is between you. And we've gotten really clear about what our patterns are, and we can talk about them. And it's just a blessing to have that kind of honesty and integrity in communication in a relationship.
Well, and every relationship requires a decision to make it work.
Yeah.
What made you decide to stick with this?
Well, I think, like I said, first of all, I was determined not to follow in my family's footsteps. It looked so painful. And I saw so many people ravaged by relationship. And I just determined I was not going to be ravaged by relationship. I was going to do it wisely. And I think I married David in 1983, and pretty much about 8 years later, I started my master's program in psychology. So I immediately began to, as we're talking, process everything and diagnose everybody within a 5-mile radius.
Why the switch?
Well, I think because I was burned out on the performative aspect of theater, I was burned out on getting reviews and getting seen and having people's opinions about me rule my life, that I wanted to just go into something that was deeply internal. And psychology is an exploration of the psyche, of the deep unconscious. And I love that. That is such a home base for me. I love that world. I love understanding it. I love operating in it. I love being with clients in it. It's taking a comment or a phrase or a feeling and excavating down, and where does that come from and how does that feel? And is that where you want to land, or do you want to shift that to some other possible felt sense in your life? Can you shift struggle into joy? Can you shift anxiety into ease? Those are the questions I love to play with.
Can you describe that moment when you first felt that joy and that intense interest in your new profession?
Well, I said I'm going to take one class in psychology and see if I like it, right? As we do sometimes. And I had a 1-year-old baby and a 6-year-old son. And I went to a introduction to psychology class, and we studied Freud and Adler and Sullivan and all the, just overview. And I was hooked immediately. But I have to say, the one I think that I fell most in love with was the group process. You do a group therapy class in which you process together. And that's so much like theater, really, because in theater, you're working as an ensemble, you're working with other people, you get very fluid and flexible in relationship. And so group therapy was just an eye-opener for me. I loved it.
Theater, if memory serves, tends to attract people with a deeply seated unworthiness gene and imposter syndrome.
Well said.
I remember hearing many people say that's the reason that I became a stand-up comic like Jim Carrey, or an actor or an actress.
Yeah.
How did this psychology education that you took on help you discover how to cope with your unworthiness gene?
Good question. I think it really led me to explore the unworthiness sensation. And, in Buddhist, and I've been a meditator for 38 years. And one of the things I've learned is how to sit in the fire, how to sit in the really uncomfortable emotions And so unworthiness is a perfect example. We could spend our whole lives avoiding unworthiness, running from it, escaping it, drinking or acting out, or all kinds of ways we can avoid it. But to really come home to it and sit in it and say, all right, this hurts. This is really painful. You find a way through. You find a way out. You find a way to the other side where there is a bigger sense. There's an almost sigh of opening and acceptance that comes from meeting that uncomfortable feeling.
A fascinating conversation we're having with Cynthia Moore. Her exciting new book is called Dancing on Coals, a memoir of an overperformer. Do you still feel like you're an overperformer?
A little bit every now and then I can feel it kick in. But hopefully not living from that place.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into meditation. It's so hard to step into the fire. How do you encourage people who are afraid to do that?
I like to work with people in two ways. I like to do the cognitive version where you talk and they tell you what's going on. And then I often in a therapy session will ask a client to close their eyes and feel into what we're talking about. So take unworthiness. If a client is saying, I felt this unworthiness yesterday with my boyfriend, I might say, okay, close your eyes and drop into that and tell me how that feels in your body. Because once we name it in our body, we are really meeting it in a visceral, personal way. And I accompany them so that they feel safe, because mostly we don't feel safe encountering those tricky places, right? We're like, no, I don't want to. Sometimes they'll even say, I don't want to, and I won't make them. But they trust me. They know that if they do, they'll end up feeling better as a result of it. So we'll go into that place, and often I can also provide a kind of an opening to a bigger place that can hold that in them, because we all have, as the Buddhists would call it, a bigger self. And the bigger self can hold that little wounded place that says, I'm so unworthy. I'm in so much pain. And so if they can feel that, really get that, and also feel the part of them that can hold that with compassion, there's a shift that occurs. And that's what meditation has taught me, that's the magic.
All authors that I talk to have this horrific fear when they look at that first blank page of the book that hasn't been written yet. They're sure if they've written before, it's going to be the last book they ever write because everybody's going to hate it. Yeah. What were you feeling when you looked at that blank page?
I love a blank page. I'm a person that loves beginnings. I love a blank page because to me, anything is possible. You can start anywhere. And I believe in the unconscious. When I teach writing classes. And when I teach writing from the deep unconscious, writing from flow, writing from the heart, writing from a place that's not coming from this prefrontal cortex here, but releasing, surrendering to something bigger. That's where the muse comes, right? That's where inspiration comes. So if you can open and let something come out, then it's not you that's writing it. Something is writing through you. That's the ideal. I hope something wrote through me. That's what I pray for.
How do we get there?
Meditation. Well, there's ways to train your mind to drop in, right? We can train our mind. I've done a lot of hypnosis in working with clients. It's not traditional hypnosis, but learning how to drop into a deeper sense. And writing takes that same process. How do you drop into a deeper place where you're open to receiving inspiration?
And meditation, in my experience, has been an exercise in trying to empty everything from your mind. And that moment, even the moment you realize that you're there for a second, it goes away. How do you maintain that practice when there's so much frustration associated with it?
Ain't that the question? That's the question, right? How do we keep it? And you can't keep it. I jokingly said to someone the other day, I said, I thought this book would be finished when I was finally enlightened. And then I realized that enlightenment is a fluid process. You're in and you're out, right? You have that moment of awakening where your mind is empty and you feel actually present, and then it's gone, just like you're saying. And it's fluid. So I wrote about that. I wrote about the fluidity of it coming and it going, and you get it and you lose it and you try to get it back. And then you get it more and more, I think.
There's a metaphor I like to use that we wake up every morning and put on a superhero outfit to face the day and hope that nobody discovers who we really are. What advice can you give to those of us who try to do that, to give us the courage to take off the outfit and be real?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I love that. My daughter once told me, the one thing, I said, what would be one message I could give you as a mother that would be the most meaningful thing? And she said, I've got tears now, trust yourself. And so I've tried to hold that for her, trust yourself. And I would say that to the person in the superhero cape. Take off your cape and trust yourself, because something big is in you, moving through you. If you can tap into that, you don't have to pretend anymore.
How does one build trust when there have been so many bumps along the road and bad decisions that reinforce imperfection?
Absolutely. So many woundings, right? So many bumps and pains. I think it's a process of, like you say, emptying your mind, because it's the mind that creates the worries and the mistakes and I went wrong, or I did this wrong, or I shouldn't have. That's all mental. It's all chatter. And if we can quiet the mind and really come into a place of silence, we feel held in a way that I believe is trust. That's what trust is that feeling of being held by something greater, whether you call it silence or stillness or divine presence, whatever you call it. There is an energy that holds us, and that makes us safe.
I've been asking the same questions in many different ways during this conversation, haven't I, Cynthia? But we are living right now in what the Chinese would call interesting times. And there's a lot of fear out there.
Yeah.
How do you advise people to cope?
I think it's crucial that we learn how to cope with fear right now. This is the number one agenda. And I think it's critical that we learn how to navigate our own nervous systems, because our nervous systems are being hijacked every day by the news. And the news, whether it's delivering an actual fact or not a fact, is delivering it with such an intensity of emotion that our nervous systems are just going off the scales. So I think we have to take in the news frugally, carefully, judiciously. Know how much you can take in. I don't take in visual content because I'll be hijacked immediately. But I can read words on a page. I can see the news. I can read the headlines, but I can't see the images. So that's one way. And the other way is to learn how to work with your nervous system so that you recognize when you're being jacked up, and you can calm yourself and enter a different, the parasympathetic nervous system. Actually, how do you shift over from that fight-flight place that we're all living in, Terry, aren't we? We're living in fight-flight. So we have to learn how to say, all right, I'm an 8 on a scale of 10 right now. I'm going to dial it down. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to come into my body and turn it back so that I'm moving into that ease, relaxation state.
So if you could distill steps for those of us who are navigating life to find a more peaceful existence, what would 3 or 4 of those steps or practices be? I know meditation is number 1 for you. What else should we be thinking about?
Well, I would say, first of all, know where you are. If you're an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10, if your anxiety is an 8, Just name that. I'm an 8 right now. First step. Second step, take a breath, come into your body. Because again, that's the mind. The mind is running away with you. So take a breath, come into your body, notice what you're feeling, notice what you're seeing, hearing, sensing, smelling, very calming to the nervous system. Then you can have some images that calm you, or even a mantra or a phrase that calms you, like be still, or it's okay to relax, or I'm safe now. And you can use these again and again to retrain your nervous system to begin to calm down and come into a more easy state, a more effortless state. So those are 3 things that I would say you can start with and learn how to do that, because those will be key ingredients to all of us as a culture coming out of hysteria.
We're talking with author and therapist Cynthia Moore, a one-time playwright, an actress, and now an author of Dancing on Coals, a memoir of an overperformer. We can't do this alone. David obviously was a magic man to come into your life. How can we as friends best support one another?
We can listen, and ask deep questions like you've been asking me. That helps us to really know ourselves and feel connected with each other. So these conversations are healing, as you know.
What do you hope people will take away from the book?
I hope they'll take a visceral experience of what it feels like to move from desperation and striving into a state of calm and peacefulness. And I hope they can sense that that's possible for all of us. And I hope they'll laugh out loud.
The book is Dancing on Coals, a memoir of an overperformer, written by our special guest, Cynthia Moore. By the time this program airs, it will be available wherever cool books are sold. Cynthia, thanks so much for the conversation.
Thank you, Terry. I really loved it.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.